Good morning. I'm Herb Heathcote. I'm on the Board of Trustees, and I'm happy to welcome everybody here this morning. I have a few announcements. Cedars, in partnership with Kol Shalom, offers free Super Supper dinners on the last Tuesday of each month. This month's Super Supper is on Tuesday, February 27th, 2 days from now, at 5 p.m. at Eagle Harbor Congregational Church. This past week on Wednesday, February 21st, Cedars members prepared and served about over 60 dinners at the Suquamish Free Community Kitchen at Suquamish United Church of Christ. This is the first time that Cedars has participated in this weekly event, and Jim tells me that the food got rave reviews, so we may continue with that. This month, the monthly meditation gathering is at the Cedars Center on Wednesday, February 28th at 5 p.m. Thank you.
So several weeks ago now, in one of our services, I talked about the importance of developing positive self-talk. And I just wanted to give you a little example from my own life. Every Sunday morning when I get up and I comb over my manuscript, I then have to get it to my iPad. And I like to work in Microsoft Word when I'm using a manuscript like this, which means I have to email it to myself because it doesn't transfer the same as a Google Doc would. But I like the formatting of Word better for this. So I've taken to the practice of writing myself a little note every week when I mail my manuscript to myself. I mail it from my minister at Cedars UU Church to my personal account so I can access it here. And this morning I wrote a note. I hope your heart is open and you speak with courage. Breathe deeply and know you are loved. This morning, I hope that our hearts are open, that we may speak with courage, breathing deeply and knowing that we are loved. These words for our opening come from Maureen Killoran. She writes, "Here in this space, we are gathered, called by our sense of urgency or duty or the longing for community, called to be together on this day. Here in this space, we are gathered, called to hold ourselves accountable to our values, to remind ourselves of those hopes and dreams, those possibilities for which sometimes in the rough and tumble world, it can be so hard to hold on to. May our coming together this day be a blessing on our hearts, on this community, and may this blessing extend outward to grace the wider world. Come, let us worship together."
When I was 16 years old, I started attending a Christian church in Bellingham. Even though I was that person, I still don't understand my motivations for doing this. How can my younger self be such a mystery? The best I can come up with is that, one, I wanted to do the right thing, but first had to discover what that was. Two, there were a bunch of other teens who went to this church, and they were friendly, and they were very welcoming. And three, there was this deity, maybe less friendly, but also accepting of me for who I was. On the first point, I still love philosophy. What are we exactly, and what are we supposed to be doing here? Ontology is really my thing. And on the second 2 points, they seem like examples of grace. Those other teens accepted me, and God accepted me. Even though now they also just seem like a great way to appeal to an introverted, socially awkward teenager with low self-esteem. At the time, I went to Mount Baker High School, but most of my church friends went to Linden Christian High School, which was in the same league as Mount Baker, and so our sports teams competed against each other. During my senior year, I was on the cross-country team, and one Friday afternoon, we traveled to Linden Christian, and we had a race. Near the end of the course, I saw some of my church friends standing alongside the course, spectators. As I passed, I said nothing because I was barely able to get enough oxygen. But they didn't say anything either, and I looked at them, and I remember them looking away and avoiding eye contact. Now, I wasn't a very good runner. At that point, maybe I was eighth or ninth on our team. And cross country might seem like a strange sport to someone who is more familiar with things like football or basketball or baseball. In those sports, half of the people go home winners and half of the people go home losers. But in cross country, there is one winner, and in a dual meet between two single-A schools, one winner and maybe 40 losers. So maybe my friends were unable to cheer for me, unable to be supportive because they didn't know how to cheer for a loser. Or maybe it was because I was representing a different high school. Regardless, I discovered that there were limits to their acceptance of me. Were there limits to God's acceptance of me as well? To be fair, I was a complete jerk when I was in high school, so it's hard to be too judgmental. It seems that sometimes teenagers aren't yet equipped to be human beings. I know I wasn't. When I finally gave up on Christianity a few years later, it wasn't because of the way I had ever been treated in a church or religious setting. It was more because of ambiguity and how there were just so many ways that the same passage in the Bible could be interpreted. It was only later that I started feeling duped, taken advantage of, played for a sucker. I still have trouble thinking of grace as something other than a word used to bait the susceptible young. In fact, Zachary will attest that when we chatted about this a few days ago, my first question is, why are you using this religious word, grace? And in church of all places. Perhaps it's time for me to reimagine this word. I dedicate the lighting of our flaming chalice to a more secular grace. Please join with me in repeating our affirmation as printed in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be.
Thank you. Good morning again. I haven't heard this recording yet. It is recording, I guess. So I'll stumble through it. Hope for the best. Hymn 121, We'll Build a Land.
Hold that while you sing. I love the intellectual and theological tension we create in our services, where we dedicate the lighting of the chalice to a secular grace, and then sing of building a land that we are called to by God. Only for Unitarian Universalists, I think, at least on Sunday mornings. Our story today is a story written by a colleague of mine, the Reverend Lynn Gardner, and it is titled Sustaining the Tree of Life. The tree stood in the middle of the village, Its trunk was so large, it took 6 people holding hands to reach around it. I think the Tenhoves would have said that was 6 Jockos. It took 6 people to reach around it. The roots were strong and wide. Its branches spread over the village square, offering shelter from the rain or shade from the summer sun. Its fruit was juicy, sweet, and plentiful. The people in the village, they loved this tree. Children played beneath it all day long and climbed its lowest branches. Young people knew that if they whispered their dreams to the tree, they would be more likely to come true. People who proclaimed their love or friendship for one another, bless you, beneath its branches found their relationships to be nourished, and elders discovered that their sweetest memories could be counted on when they were near the great tree. The tree had been witness to so many things. For generations, this tree had stood in this community as part of this community, hearing the laughter, the conversation, the dreams, and the prayers of the people. Animals loved it too. You can imagine all the birds and rabbits who would come to be near the tree to eat the fruit. One day, though, a traveling merchant arrived in the village. He rested in the shade and ate 2 pieces of this delicious fruit. "This fruit is incredible," he said. "I'd like to have some to sell in the next village that I visit. Who owns this tree? Who can I ask to buy some of this fruit?" "No one owns this tree," replied a villager. "If anything, we belong to the tree." "Well then, if no one owns the tree, then no one will mind if I pick the fruit," said the merchant, and he began to fill basket after basket. But the villager standing there, puzzled, said, "I mind. Today, I'm the keeper of the tree." "What do you mean, you're the keeper of the tree?" "We each take turns being the tree keeper. We could never own it, but we care for it. We are the protector and sustainer of this tree, just as the tree is the protector and sustainer of us." "That's ridiculous," said the merchant. "This tree doesn't need you at all. You could just take what you need and take whatever you want from the tree and continue on your way." But the villager couldn't be persuaded. "Sir, this tree isn't like that. We don't come here to take from it. Even though we receive much from it, we are keepers of the tree because this is where we are nourished. This is where our most precious memories are and where our people have dreamed. This is where we remember who we want to become." "Well," said the merchant, "you may think that this tree is very special, but it still doesn't need you to sit with it. That's just preposterous." "Ah," replied the villager, "the tree itself may not need me, but what of others who come by? Just this morning I sat with a woman whose heart was heavy with worry. Had I not been there, she would have had to carry that weight alone. And this afternoon, a tired couple came and they rested with me. They said they had been looking for a place like this for a while traveling the road. And then an elder came by, and we watched the birds in the branches together. It was beautiful. And now, here you are. You were confused about what this tree is and how to be with it. Imagine if you had arrived and not found anyone here to talk with. You might have continued thinking that everything you do is all about you. Luckily for you, my friend, I'm here to let you know that when you care for the tree of life, it becomes about much more than just you. And the merchant sat for a while in the shade, thinking about these ideas that felt new and a little challenging. As the sun went down, he picked up his bag and headed out of town, whistling a song that he hadn't thought of for years. On his way, he shared a smile with each person he met, his heart feeling strangely light and joyful. And the people of the village, you might wonder, they continued to sustain the tree of life, to care for one another, to share their gifts with each other, with grace and gratitude. May it be so for each of us as well. To begin our centering moment this morning, I want to take this time to invite the name of Nex Benedict into this space. Nex was a 16-year-old non-binary American student who died after a fight at their high school on February 7th. Benedict, who had previously been bullied at school, told police they were beaten by 3 younger girls in the restroom. Nex died the following day. Nex admired nature and had a devoted love of cats, especially their cat Zeus. They were a student and avid rock music listener. They loved the show The Walking Dead and video games like Ark and Minecraft. They were a gifted artist who enjoyed drawing, reading, and conjuring up their own cooking recipes. They were warm, kind, and always searching for the best in other people. They were all these things and more. They were going someplace. They were so free and taken too soon. I invite us now into a moment of silent reflection before our prayer. I invite you to open yourselves in a spirit of prayer. Life is complicated and uncertain and gorgeous, with some things we can count on as well. It has seasons of struggle and seasons of delight, and sometimes the two bloom and bloom simultaneously, like now maybe always. And we are here together, all of us from different corners of the world, from different families, here together, breathing together, questing together, holding each other through it all, laughing and singing in the face of it. If there is a journey to liberation, if there is a way to live resurrection, I think it's like this. May what holds us in the bondage to death or loss or hurt or sadness or literal heartbreaking limits be released. And what gives us life, hope, joy, rebirth, feel invited to claim us. And may we claim it, sinking our roots into the ground beneath us, reaching toward the sun, flowering into this season, all of whose traditions witness to life more abundant, claiming us. After a season of loss and a winter of struggling heart and mind and spirit, may we open our hearts to the abundance of creation that surrounds us and sustains us. Amen.
On many Sundays, we set aside some time for the sharing of joys and sorrows. If you have a joy or a sorrow that you would like to share, please come forward, state your name, and in a few brief sentences, share your joy or sorrow. Place a stone in the bowl so that we all may share your burden for a sorrow, or for a joy, pour a little water in the bowl so that we may all be buoyed up. For those of you at home, please take a few moments to reflect upon your own joys or sorrows. As a reminder, this part of the service is neither live streamed nor recorded. and place a final stone for all of the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, held delicately in our hearts.
If you'd all open your books, the Teal books, to hymn number 1023, Building Bridges. Okay, do you want to say something?
Yeah, this group over here is a little sparse, so I want you to sing out, okay? Are we going to be second?
Yes, I guess in rounds.
And we're going to do a round, sing it 3 times,
Yes, I guess.
and I'll signal you probably in the wrong place where you can come in.
We got this.
I am Mike Cox, and I'm here each month. As you know, we do a special collection for our congregation. This month, we decided to do the Faith Action Network. If you don't know who the Faith Action Network is, it's a group of over 160 communities across Washington State, and I could read you the mission and all that stuff. The bottom line is they do good stuff. And so as an example of that, a couple weeks ago, Patricia and myself, Dee Eisenhower and a couple others went down to something called the what's it called? Interfaith Advocacy Day. And it was amazing. There was over 200 people. We get together, they break it out into like 6 sections: housing, environment, what all the great stuff that they do. We had discussions, we learned about the legislation, then they set up times for us to meet our legislators and the legislative assistants. So we got to meet Drew Hansen and Tara Sims's legislative assistant. They were in session, and so we weren't able to meet Tara. And Greg, he was too busy, we didn't get to meet him. And we had some time there to talk about some of the issues we thought were good. But then we got to see Governor Inslee. Dee Eisenhower just happens to be their minister. Shocking. They don't go, just to tell you, but shh, don't tell, Dee told me not to tell anybody. So anyway, we got to go in there, and the governor and Trudy were there, and we got, 20, 25 minutes with them. It was pretty cool. And of course, Patricia especially was hard hitting. Why aren't you doing this and doing that? Anyway, so that's our special collection today. So if the baskets could come around, that would be great. So thank you. And if you do have a check that you're writing, make it out to Cedars UU Church and with Fan in the memo, and put in the offering basket. If you want to send it to the Cedars Church, do that by March 3rd. Thanks. Gifts. And one last thing, I just wanted to thank Steve, Suquamish UCC. He was a cook. There was a lot of other people involved, but Steve did a marvelous job. Thank you, Steve.
So I have another story for all of us. And it's a story that, to be honest, I couldn't find the origin of. It shows up, though, a lot of places, mostly in leadership blogs about accountability. It's a story about 4 people. You may know them. Their names are everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Do you know these people? Somebody does. One day there was an important job to be done. It was really important. The details aren't important, but the job was. Everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. In the end, it ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have. The job didn't get done. Perhaps you've had situations like this in your life, maybe at work or in your family life, among groups of friends. Times when something needed to be attended to, but nobody did. Hopefully, if this has happened to you, it was inconsequential or small, minor things that were okay to be left unattended to. But that's not always the case. I know that when I think of this story, situations like this, where we're all looking around going, well, who needs to do this thing? I think of what many people, if you've ever taken a first aid class, may have been taught. If you come upon someone and you need to respond to them, maybe perform CPR or administer some sort of other first aid, it's common for other people to start gathering around, watching. And in that moment, you might be tempted to say, somebody call 911. But who's somebody? What you're supposed to do instead in these situations is to turn and point to someone and say, you, Patricia, call 911. to be direct. Not just anybody, not somebody, but you. I like that little ringtone. Instead of saying somebody call 911, it's okay. Well, let's all do a little dance. Do, 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 do. It's in. It worked. Awesome. Instead of saying somebody call 911, you point and you specify who needs to call 911. Much like in this situation, one of the features that I have come to recognize about this thing we call accountability is the importance of clear communication. It's hard to hold someone accountable to something if nobody knows what that something is. The something needs to be named clearly. Directions or expectations need to be stated. So that's a little bit about the accountability piece of today's sermon. But what about grace? We talked about this earlier at the beginning of our service. I had a really great conversation with Gregory on Friday about this service, and actually I think this is probably one of the services I've had the most conversations with people about, just because I found it interesting and it kept coming up. But I had this wonderful conversation with Gregory, and interestingly enough, over the time that we spent together, besides just checking in and seeing how each other was doing, the interesting part is we spent the bulk of our time exploring this idea of grace. And when we shifted and talked about accountability, we both kind of admitted, well, that feels pretty straightforward to us. Grace, on the other hand, not so much. Often, when I'm trying to understand a word like grace, or many of these sort of theological words that we draw on or that come up in conversations, I do what anyone my age does. I go to Google, and this is maybe where I diverge from my age group, because I go to Google and I search for the etymology of the word in question, the origin, the history of the word in question. I love etymologies. I love exploring where words come from, what our language means, how we use it, and what's being communicated in very subtle ways, the meanings that we can read into words. Take the word compassion, for instance. The word compassion comes into English from Old French, which inherited it from Latin. The original Latin, compati, means to suffer with. To suffer with. Compassion. Maybe you've heard references of the Passion of the Christ. I know that was a popular movie, and I guess there's a book about it that's a few thousand years old too. But there's a popular movie that came out, but this word passion, it means the suffering of the Christ. Compassion, to suffer with. That comes up a lot, actually. Community has it as well. Same root. That gives us a bit of an understanding about what it means to be compassionate. It's to come alongside someone and to suffer with them. Hopefully, in doing that, we alleviate some of that suffering together. The word grace, on the other hand, when I went to Google and did my etymology search, was not quite as clear, or at least it didn't seem as clear to me how we got from what this original root was to how we use the word today. Like compassion, the original root of the word grace comes from Latin by way of French into English. The original gratus, maybe you've heard that in other Latin-based languages, gratus means pleasing or thankful. This word, it means pleasing or thankful. But that isn't the way that I tend to use the word grace today when I use it. Perhaps the closest I might come to this way of understanding grace as something pleasing would be to say, well, that dance is graceful. They move with grace. I might use it that way. But when I think of the word grace, what I'm oftentimes thinking about is a sort of malleability, an ability for us to respond in the situation to what's happening. I think of it as, I like to say, I'm an emergent strategist. Maybe that's just my way of showing grace. I think of grace as being the thing that we show to each other when maybe we have fallen short of the things that we said we would do. Maybe when someone's having a bad day, we might say, I'll show them a little grace today. I don't think of this as something that's maybe pleasing or that I'm grateful for. In fact, sometimes it feels like, gosh, I wish I didn't have to be so graceful and people would just do what they said they would. But have you met people? The way I use grace is about flexibility or accommodation. Recognizing this, I wonder what I'm actually saying when I talk about grace in the first place. Thinking back to the story of the tree that we considered earlier, what the villager said to the traveling merchant kind of resonates with me about grace. He said this, sort of in the middle of the story. Sir, this tree isn't like that. We don't come here and take from it, even though we receive much. We are keepers of the tree because this is where we are nourished. This is where some of our most precious memories are and where our people have dreamed. This is where we remember who we want to become. Reminds me of somewhere else I like to come and be with people. When I think about this story in relation to our exploration of grace, I think I now understand grace to be a sort of gratitude. A gratitude toward the way a situation or a relationship in our life is unfolding. I'm sure there are days that tree was maybe not so pleasant, attracting the animals we would prefer not to, and it drew the attention of this merchant. The villager showed grace, a sort of gratitude towards this situation, this opportunity to be in relationship. It's the ability to look around at the world and see the pleasing things in life that is grace. It's the ability to look at that relationship where maybe a boundary was crossed, but you still value that relationship. We extend our grace. Your presence is a pleasing gift. It brings me meaning and sustenance. It brings me nourishment. I like this way of thinking about grace personally because it allows me to create a spiritual practice out of what might otherwise seem like an abstract concept. Every day, I am given chances to pause and reflect on what is pleasing in the world around me and what is good and life-giving. Perhaps this meaning is what I've meant all along when I said, here's a little grace, or I could use some grace. Perhaps this is what I've meant by this word, that there's something life-giving in being flexible rather than rigid. To show grace is to show gratitude for how things are, for who people are. Oh boy, I'll tell you though, there are many times in my life that I am not always pleased with people, and that grace is hard to conjure. There are times where the situations that happen in the world are not pleasing, and it's hard to look out there and say, oh, just be graceful. I think it's a lot easier in some ways, despite still being challenged, to find pleasure and gratitude in the presence of a tree, or even in the people who are in my life that I have that meaningful and close connection with. Friends, family, all of you. It's easier to find grace here than in some far off and often hard situation. And yet, I believe we are called to find some sort of meaning, even in those places. In the places where it's hard to find the good, these are the places that I believe we are called to hold each other accountable. I think of the tragic death of Nex Benedict that we paused to remember earlier. It would have been easy for me to stand here in this pulpit and say, somebody do something. The situation is awful, yet everybody is just standing there. Whose job is it to respond? It's your job. It's my job. It's all of our job. And that, again, is where the accountability piece comes in. There are many things that we are unclear and uncertain about as Unitarian Universalists. Is there a God? Maybe. An afterlife? Well, I think that might depend on which Unitarian Universalist you're talking to. But the one thing that I believe our faith is clear about, is certain about, the thing that my faith is certain about, is that we have affirmed a commitment to work for justice. It's not like we haven't communicated this commitment to each other over the years, over and over again. Through sermon, song, and service, we have affirmed this commitment again and again. That's why I believe that when tragedy strikes, yes, it's our job to be compassionate, to suffer with, and to show grace. But it's not just somebody's job. It's our job. We've communicated this expectation. We've affirmed it. We are called to hold each other to this commitment while at the same time allowing for those expressions of grace to shine through. Grace without accountability is unbridled permissiveness. Anything goes. I know I've heard sometimes our faith is described as that, as the faith where anything goes. But we know there are limits. And accountability without grace is authoritarianism. We have agreed to hold each other accountable not to be authoritarian, but because we believe that the things we value are important enough to hold each other accountable. Holding these two forces simultaneously, that middle way or that golden mean that Aristotle wrote about, is how I believe we bend the arc of the universe towards justice, to the glory of life. I'd like to invite us to rise as you are willing and able as we prepare to sing our final hymn of our service today. Hymn number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And this is our hymn of the month we've been singing this month, so this is our final chance to sing it with gusto this month.
I was going to give a brief history of this song because it's interesting, but I don't want to get carried away. So if you're interested look it up. It was written as a poem in 1900, and later lyrics were added, and from there, it's an interesting read. But I'll let you do that.
Please repeat after me as we extinguish our flaming chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth. The warmth of community or the fire of commitment. The warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I invite you to join in a call and response song. It's one we've sung before, and I hope we're learning it. Courage, courage, my friends, you do not go alone. We will be with you to sing the journey home. Our service this day has ended, but our service to the world and one another begins anew. May we go forth from this place with courage, the courage to be who we are called to be, to show grace in those places in need of grace, and hold each other accountable to the commitments we make. May it be so.